It all started with a ghost. Or at least, that's what I told myself to make the whole thing feel a little less ridiculous. See, our house, the one Christina and I bought 3 years into our marriage, was an old craftsman-style thing that came with a personality. The kind of house with a basement that creaked like it had opinions, a staircase that never made the same sound twice, and a second-floor hallway that always felt 2 degrees colder than the rest of the place. Christina called it charm. I called it a lawsuit waiting to happen. Anyway, the ghost. I was down in the basement on a Sunday morning, half looking for my drill and half hoping I wouldn't find a raccoon with a grudge. Christina had gone out for errands, which, in our marriage, had gradually come to mean to Target for one thing and back 3 hours later with 17. Nothing new there. What was new, however, was the hollow sound when I knocked on the back wall behind the shelves. I wasn't trying to be clever. I just dropped a washer down the back of the tool shelf and, in my frustration, gave the wall a good thump. Hollow. Now, if you're picturing me excitedly donning a hard hat and turning into Indiana Jones, don't. I stood there for a solid minute just tapping different spots like a confused percussionist before finally sliding the shelf aside and discovering, to my complete surprise, a narrow, sealed door. Painted the same beige as the wall, it was the sort of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. Or if, say, your wife had deliberately placed a heavy wooden shelf in front of it and casually stacked it with years of forgotten junk and one expired bottle of all-purpose cleaner. Naturally, I opened it. Inside was a stairwell. Not down, up. And not toward the attic either, because the attic had its own pull-down ladder and its own lovely colony of spiders I'd already introduced myself to last spring. This was something else entirely. A hidden staircase leading up into what should have been nothing. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, because despite not being a particularly dramatic man, I do enjoy a healthy dose of paranoia. I was trying to think of something sensible, structural access, maybe a dusty storage nook. What I did not expect was what I actually found. A small, finished room with a desk, a chair, and brace yourself, a corkboard. A corkboard. With maps, strings, notes, the whole red yarn crime drama setup. It was like stepping into a rejected pilot for a low-budget detective show. Now, at this point, any reasonable person would have backed slowly down the stairs, called their spouse, and asked calmly if they knew anything about the secret room above the laundry room ceiling. But I am not a reasonable person. I was a man who had spent 2 hours earlier that morning untangling the garden hose and trying to convince himself that adult life was exactly what he'd signed up for. So no, I did not back down. I stepped in. That's when things got weird. Because the names on the board? They weren't celebrities or historic landmarks. They were names I recognized. 2 of them, in fact, were neighbors from the block we used to live on before this house. One was her coworker, Brent, the guy who always smiled like he was trying to sell me something I didn't need. Another was her college roommate, the one she accidentally lost touch with. The center of the board, right above all the strings, had one name circled in red pen. Just one. Zachary. That's me, by the way. In case I hadn't mentioned it. I stood there, staring at my own name, trying to figure out if this was some kind of elaborate anniversary scavenger hunt or the setup for a Lifetime movie where the husband gets replaced by a younger, wealthier model after a tragic stairwell accident. Then I saw the notebook. It was sitting open on the desk, like someone had just been there and stepped out for a cup of tea. The handwriting was Christina's. I'd know those swoopy little loops anywhere. I teased her about it often, how her capital FS looked like medieval instruments of torture. But this wasn't a grocery list. This was, well, it was a journal of sorts. A meticulous, day-by-day log of events and interactions, color-coded and annotated like she was preparing for a trial I hadn't been invited to. And let me tell you, reading your own name followed by the phrase, "doesn't suspect a thing," is an oddly clarifying experience. There were other things too. Small comments that might have passed as jokes if I hadn't known better. Dinner with him again should win an Oscar for pretending I still care about his rants on socket wrenches. Charming. Told Brent I'd meet him Friday, same excuse as last time, should hold. Delightful. Zachary's eyes actually lit up when I suggested we repaint the guest room. His optimism is starting to give me hives. Really warms a guy's heart. Now, I'm no therapist, but I'm pretty sure when your wife starts cataloging your conversations like a research subject in a behavioral study, things aren't going well. I left the room without touching anything else. Quietly slid the shelf back over the door like it had never been moved. Then I sat in the living room for a long time. Didn't turn on the TV. Didn't touch my phone. just stared at the floor and tried to process the fact that my marriage apparently had a secret wing, complete with evidence boards and sarcasm-fueled contempt journals. Christina came home a little after noon, toting a shopping bag and whistling like she hadn't just authored a psychological thriller about our relationship. She kissed me on the cheek, asked me if I wanted to order lunch, and made some offhand comment about how we really should clean out the basement one of these days. I smiled. I nodded. I said I'd look into it. Because I knew something now. I knew that somewhere between the grocery store runs and the affectionate neck rubs, my wife had constructed a second reality. A place where I was no longer her husband, just a placeholder. A character in a life she was actively rewriting behind drywall and plywood. And for the first time in our entire marriage, I realized I wasn't angry. No, I was curious. Because if Christina was playing detective in our marriage, I wanted to see just how far she'd gone. And when I finally confronted her, it wasn't going to be with tears or accusations. It was going to be with a PowerPoint. 5 slides. Full color. With diagrams. So there I was the next morning, sitting in my garage, staring at a half-assembled patio heater and wondering when exactly my life turned into a spin-off of a cable procedural drama. Christina had left for work an hour earlier, driving off in the Subaru we both pretended to love because it made us feel responsible. I, meanwhile, was pretending to care about finishing the heater, mostly so I had an excuse not to go inside and make eye contact with the walls that now felt like smug witnesses. See, once you find a hidden room with your name on the wall and color-coded charts documenting your decline in conversation value, you start thinking differently about your kitchen cabinets. Like, are the mugs just mugs, or do they have notes taped under them rating your coffee-making skills? I didn't bring it up to her. I didn't even hint. The goal was to gather information, and nothing ruins that faster than acting like you've already connected the dots. I wanted the whole picture, not just a sneak peek. Which is why I did what any sensible man in my situation would do. I went to the town archive. Now, before you judge me for being a walking sweater vest, let me explain. Christina volunteers with the local Rotary Club, a fact she reminds me of frequently, usually right before asking if I remembered to RSVP to another fundraiser she doesn't actually want to go to. And it just so happens that the Rotary Club recently renovated part of the town library and set up their new meeting space there. Christina had made a big deal about it, mostly because they gave her one of those little fake certificates you can frame and put on a shelf next to the vase of dead flowers from 3 anniversaries ago. So, while pretending to look up homeowner plumbing permits for a renovation project, I made my way into the back wing of the library and found the room with the Rotary Club's framed achievements. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then I noticed a file cabinet. Not even locked. It had a plastic label that read Minutes and Member Logs. And right there, second drawer down, was a folder marked Community Improvement Committee, Member Reports. I'll give Christina credit. She's thorough. Pages of meeting notes, volunteer schedules, attendance logs, and, interestingly enough, event correspondence with certain individuals, including Brent. Yes, that Brent. The coworker with teeth so white you could use them to signal aircraft. Brent's name popped up a lot more than expected. He wasn't even on the committee. But there were dozens of emails printed out and neatly clipped to attendance sheets. Most were bland, scheduling, thank yous, planning rights. But there were a few marked with highlighter, and that's where things got interesting. There was a note from Christina to the club's event coordinator. It read, Brent will be attending with me again. We'll coordinate the setup before others arrive. It's just easier that way. Right. Easier. Like the way it's easier to lie by omission when you've got a side project going on. Except this side project had a very specific schedule, and according to one of the other logs, the setup sessions had become so frequent that someone, bless their passive-aggressive heart, finally scribbled in the margin. Why is Brent always here before everyone else? Does he work here now? That person, whoever they are, deserved a medal. Maybe even the little wooden plaque Christina got for outstanding civic spirit. But none of this was definitive. Suspicious? Sure. Like mayonnaise left out overnight. But I needed more than weird emails and a gut feeling sharpened by 6 years of shared taxes and passive-aggressive dishwasher loading. I left the library empty-handed, technically. Emotionally, I left with the equivalent of 5 red flags folded into a paper swan. When I got home, I went back to the hidden room. I hadn't touched it since the day I found it, mostly because it felt like stepping into someone else's diary. But now, I was all in. I brought down my phone and snapped photos of everything. Every page, every diagram, every sarcastic bullet point about how I didn't notice her haircut again. I even found a small USB drive taped under the desk. Not labeled. No clue what was on it, which meant it was either a digital cookbook or something that would make me rethink my entire personality. Turns out, it was a collection of voice memos. Yeah, voice memos. Dozens of them. Recorded on her phone, probably while walking around the neighborhood, or in the car, or hiding in the laundry room like she was recording confessions for a courtroom drama. She never named me directly, but the clues were obvious. She used vague nicknames like Mr. Calendar, me, I assume, because I once made a shared spreadsheet for meal planning, truly my low point, and Project B. Brent, who else? The most enlightening one? A rambling audio entry from 2 weeks ago. Spend another lunch with Project B. He actually listens, unlike Mr. Calendar, who only hears in bullet points. I know it's wrong, but I also know I'm not wrong to want more than just scheduled affection and matching towels. She went on for 4.5 minutes. I listened to it twice. Not because I was hurt. I mean, okay, a little, but because I was genuinely fascinated. She had created a whole internal podcast where she played both the host and the guest, and the topic was how to secretly detach from your marriage while still ordering groceries together. That night, she came home and asked me if I remembered to water the plants. I said yes, which was a lie, and then asked if Brent was still planning on helping her with that community thing. She paused for half a second, blinked, then said, "Oh, no. He's out of town this week." Sure he is. The irony here was that the community project she'd spent so much time organizing involved installing benches near the town's walking trail. Benches, I might add, with plaques dedicated to people who gave selflessly to others. So here I was, sitting at the dining table with a woman who had a secret room dedicated to evaluating my conversational flaws, a potential emotional or more than emotional entanglement with a man who wore too much cologne and got free muffins from every barista in town, and a hard drive full of audio notes that could have won awards if passive resentment was a podcast category. And what did I do? I asked her if she wanted to go to the hardware store with me this weekend. Because sometimes, the best way to study a volcano is to sit near the top and see when it starts rumbling. Christina loved Thursdays. Not because anything remotely thrilling happened on them, but because it was the one night of the week she got to disappear into her me time. That's what she called it, capitalized, as if it were trademarked. Me time usually meant 2 hours at the community center helping plan events no one under 65 attended, followed by 40 minutes of staring into her phone while I refilled the burrito and pretended our kitchen didn't feel like an awkward waiting room. But that Thursday, I joined her. Not because I wanted to. Let's be clear, I'd rather alphabetize hex keys. But because I'd gone from husband to investigator in my own house, and the best way to catch someone pretending nothing's wrong is to play along until they forget you're paying attention. "You," she said when I told her I'd come with. "To the committee meeting?" I nodded and gave her the smile I reserve for IRS agents and distant relatives who sell supplements. At the community center, I met her fellow volunteers, each one clearly startled to see me, like I was a ghost or the reason the copier stopped working. They all had name tags. Christina didn't give me one. She said they were out. Brent, of course, was there. Wearing a vest. Not a functional vest. Mind you, one of those fashion ones that exist solely to let people know they've Googled business casual at least once. He greeted me like a man who was legally required to. I gave him a handshake that communicated, "I know exactly how many times you've been early to things you don't belong at." The meeting began. It was about budgeting bingo prizes and scheduling park cleanup shifts, which somehow required 45 minutes of debate. Christina talked a lot. Brent agreed with her a lot. I counted 17 affirming head nods and 3 separate incidents where he chuckled at things that weren't funny. Like when she said, "We should keep things simple this year." And he laughed, like that was the punchline. After the meeting, they all mingled over lukewarm coffee. I pretended to refill my cup just to listen. Christina and Brent stood close. Not touching, but close enough for the phrase, respectful distance, to file a complaint. "You coming tomorrow?" Brent asked her. "Yeah, I already told them I'd help set up." "You." "I wouldn't miss it," he said, like he was talking about a trip to space and not folding tables in a room that smelled like carpet glue. On the way home, I asked Christina about tomorrow. She said it was prep for the spring neighbors social and that she'd be gone most of the evening. I said I might stop by. She blinked longer than necessary. That's her tell. Most people fidget. Christina blinks like she's rebooting. The next morning, I took the day off from work and visited the print shop where the community flyers get made. The manager, an older guy who looked like he ran on toner fumes and spite, handed me a copy of the flyer Christina had designed for the spring social. Bright colors. Overuse of Comic Sans. But what caught my attention was this special thanks section at the bottom. Christina and Brent's names, side by side. Not alphabetical. Just conveniently paired like a dish you never ordered but keep getting served. Then I called my cousin Jordan. Now, Jordan's not what you'd call a genius. He once installed a ceiling fan directly into drywall. But he's the kind of person who says yes before asking why, which is exactly what I needed. I asked him to come to the social and pose as a local business sponsor thinking of donating. His job was simple. Talk to Christina and Brent, pretend to be impressed, ask questions, and record everything. Like a sting operation? Jordan asked. No. Like an awkward conversation with a hidden agenda. Cool. Do I get a badge? Please stop talking. That night, I arrived at the social after it had already started. Christina hadn't noticed me yet. I stayed near the back, behind a raffle table staffed by a woman who smelled like glue sticks and suspicion. Jordan was already talking to Christina and Brent, making exaggerated hand gestures like he was pitching a ride-sharing app for lawnmowers. Brent was eating it up. Christina smiled too much. Not her real smile, the one she uses when she wants someone to like her more than they should. Jordan kept her engaged long enough for me to sneak behind the booth where they'd stashed their bags and flyers. I wasn't proud of it, but dignity gets less important when your name ends up in secret stairwell monologues. I found her planner. Not the main one. Christina kept a decoy planner in the kitchen for groceries and appointments. This one was smaller, tucked into a side pouch. It had pages marked with shorthand and initials. At first glance, it looked like scheduling nonsense. But then I saw the list labeled CB confirmed. CB, Christina and Brent. There were dates, locations, and one entry marked with a smiley face. If you ever find a smiley face in a secret planner not addressed to you, go ahead and cancel the next 3 months of pretending. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Then I walked out. Jordan texted me 5 minutes later. Pretty sure they think I'm opening a new cupcake lounge. Also, Brent winked at me. Weird energy. At home, Christina returned late. Said the cleanup had taken longer. I told her I'd seen Jordan there. She looked surprised. Said she hadn't noticed. I asked how Brent was. She said, busy. That's when I told her about the fundraiser I was organizing. Completely made up. For what? She asked. Awareness, I said. For what cause? Awareness. Just general awareness. People forget things. I want them to remember. She nodded slowly. Blinked again. I watched her carefully. She was trying to figure out if I was being sincere or if I was doing what she'd been doing for months, lying politely with a straight face. That night, I sent myself every photo I'd taken of her secret room, the planner, and her calendar. I saved them to a cloud drive and titled the folder Things Christina Probably Doesn't Want to Discuss. Not because I was planning anything dramatic, but because if she ever tried to turn this into one of those "we just grew apart" stories, I'd have a fully curated exhibit ready for review. If someone told me 6 months ago that I'd be writing a personal spreadsheet titled Christina's Efficiency versus Loyalty Metrics, I would have assumed they were describing the plot of a painfully dry play about HR policy. But here we were. And I had tabs. Color-coded ones. A green tab for neutral events. Yellow for questionable. And the red ones? Let's just say they were stacking up like unpaid parking tickets. The trick wasn't finding the red flags. It was choosing what to do with them. I didn't want drama. I didn't need revenge to be cinematic. I just wanted her to feel, with the quiet weight of bureaucracy, how thoroughly she'd underestimated the man who once lost a weekend organizing the sock drawer alphabetically by brand. My opening move? Open house. Christina loved real estate almost as much as she loved being right. She wasn't an agent or investor or anything relevant, but she had a mildly unhealthy addiction to touring other people's homes. She called it getting ideas for upgrades. What it really meant was walking into freshly staged houses, whispering judgments about backsplash choices, and then subtly implying our home was at risk of falling behind in some invisible suburban race. So I told her I'd found a new place. Casual, offhand, like I was joking. You're moving? She asked, only half laughing. I didn't say I was moving. I just said I scheduled a showing. You don't have to come, but it's got one of those sunrooms you like. Thought I'd check it out. Alone. Now, the idea of me voluntarily initiating any sort of housing transaction must have rattled her internal compass, because for the first time in weeks, she offered to clear her calendar. Just like that. Brent who? Saturday came. We drove to a modest mid-century place on the other side of town. Not flashy, but neat. Quiet street. Low-maintenance yard. The kind of house you could picture someone re-entering society in after some kind of suburban scandal. The agent greeted us, mildly confused as to why we were attending an open house with no listed name on the sign-in sheet. I signed it anyway. Not with our real names, of course. I went with Lance and Cheryl and made sure to circle interested in financing options, just to buy us some time. We walked the house like two strangers pretending to care about granite. "What are you looking for in a new place?" she asked, trying to sound light. "Storage. Secrecy. Maybe a nice drywalled room with a corkboard," I said without turning. She stopped walking for half a second, blinked, always the blinking, then said, "Is that supposed to be funny?" "Depends who you ask," I replied, taking a mental note of how her face twitched when she thought someone else was in control of the conversation. When we got home, I didn't say anything more about it. Just dropped the flyer on the kitchen counter and walked away. She stared at it for a long time, probably trying to calculate how serious I was. I wasn't serious about moving, but I was absolutely serious about letting her know that I could move. That option now lived comfortably in the drawer next to the takeout menus and the expired coupons she never threw away. Next, I launched what I call the survey. I drafted it in Google Forms and sent it out to 10 mutual friends and family members under the headline, "Quick Relationship Insight Poll, Anonymous and Fun." It included questions like, who do you think plans better surprises, Zachary or Christina? Which one of us is more likely to hide something from the other? Have you ever suspected either of us of having a secret hobby or connection? On a scale from 1 to 10, how entertaining would our separation be? Most people thought it was a joke. I let them believe that. The real purpose was Christina. She found out about the survey when my cousin Jessica brought it up casually during a weekend brunch we didn't really want to host but felt obligated to. Jessica laughed, said it was hilarious, and started listing off some of the answers she put. Christina didn't laugh. She said, "You're making a game out of us?" "No," I said, sipping coffee. "It's more of a data-driven exploration of perception versus reality." She said nothing, but her right foot started tapping, which meant I had officially gotten under the veneer. By Monday, I had a full report assembled from the responses. I titled it "Perception Gaps in Long-Term Partnerships, a Case Study." I left it open on the desktop computer she uses when she needs to focus better than a laptop allows. It included charts, bar graphs. One section titled "Observe Behavioral Divergence Post-Community Committee Involvement." She closed the document without comment that night, but she left her phone face up for the first time in weeks. Progress. Phase 3 was a bit more hands-on. I printed out a week's worth of Christina's planner entries from the secret room and pasted them onto a trifold board. Yes, the kind used in science fairs and desperate political campaign tables. I put it in the garage, where she kept her yoga mat and seasonal wreaths. On the top, I labeled it Q1 Behavioral Objectives and Performance Review. Then I left it there. Said nothing. Waited. 3 days passed. Nothing. Then on Thursday evening, after she got back from planning a silent auction that was somehow making more noise than a marching band, she came into the kitchen and leaned against the counter like she'd been preparing her speech during the drive. "You're being petty. I'm being thorough. Is this supposed to shame me?" "No. It's supposed to be informative. You love information." She crossed her arms. "What do you want, Zachary?" "Nothing," I said. "That's the part you keep missing." She didn't respond. Just stared. Probably wondering how long I'd known. Probably retracing everything she'd said over the past few months, trying to remember what she hadn't hidden as well as she thought. I gave her a minute. Then I grabbed my jacket, said I had an errand, and walked out. I didn't go far. Just the mailbox. But I took my time. Gave her space to sit in the echo. That night, she didn't come to bed until almost 2 a.m. When she did, she laid very still. Not touching me. Not speaking. Just existing beside me like two people waiting for the same delayed flight, pretending they weren't secretly trying to switch seats. I didn't need to confront her anymore. That part was done. Christina scheduled a coffee with me like it was a dentist appointment. That's how I knew we'd finally arrived at the part of the story where people start saying things like "moving forward," and "this doesn't have to be dramatic." It was on a Sunday, 11 a.m., sharp, in our living room, which, by the way, she referred to as a neutral setting, as if it didn't contain the couch where she once fell asleep snoring during a documentary I picked, or the chair she used to fold laundry in while humming the same song off-key. I showed up wearing a collared shirt, just to make her uncomfortable. She'd taken to wearing sweatshirts with motivational quotes printed on the sleeves lately. This one said, "It's a journey." I almost clapped. Perfect. So she said, folding her hands like she was about to negotiate a tax treaty. "I think we should talk about where we are." I nodded. Great. I brought a notepad. "Would you like me to date the minutes?" She didn't smile. I didn't expect her to. Sarcasm loses its charm when you're on the receiving end of a 3-act strategic takedown. "I feel like we've been disconnected," she began. "You should check the basement router," I said. "Zachary." I nodded and stayed quiet. Let her run the meeting. "I'm not going to insult your intelligence," she continued. "Clearly you've noticed some things. And I know we've both been under pressure. Work, life, expectations. We drifted. That happens." "Sure," I replied. "Just like tectonic plates. One day you're sharing closet space, and next thing you know, there's a whole fault line under the shoe rack." She exhaled like she was rehearsing patience. Probably thought that counted as emotional growth. "I don't think either of us is the villain," she said, which, incidentally, is a sentence people only say when they've already picked the soundtrack for their apology montage. I flipped a page in my notepad and wrote, "Not a villain," her words. She saw me do it. "Can we just be adults about this?" Of course. I've already created an Excel sheet titled Post-Separation Logistics, Shared Resources and Legal Decency. Tab 3 has a list of what you bought, what I bought, and what neither of us wants to touch ever again. She blinked. I'm convinced she thought I'd react differently. Raise my voice, storm out, maybe deliver a long emotional monologue about betrayal. What she got instead was a calm, emotionally regulated man with a color-coded exit plan and a working knowledge of every item in the junk drawer. "This isn't just about Brent," she finally said. I raised an eyebrow. "His name has entered the chat." Noted. It was more than that. It's about how I felt. You were always organizing, fixing, managing. Everything was a system with you. A routine. I needed more. Presence. Emotion. Not just reminders for dentist appointments and monthly water filters. I nodded. And your response to emotional distance was to build a secret room where you documented your emotional distance. That's the sort of irony you don't see every day. "It wasn't like that," she said. "Oh, no." I read it. Thoroughly. Even the voice notes. Your audio editing could use work, by the way. You kept clearing your throat after every petty confession like you were hoping someone would remix it into a podcast intro. She finally cracked. Just a little. Her lips flattened in that way they did when I used to say things she couldn't defend but didn't want to admit were accurate. "I didn't want it to get like this," she said. "No one ever does," I replied. "That's how you end up with a garden you never weeded and a marriage you never cleaned out until someone's knee-deep in both, trying to remember what was even planted in the first place." We sat in silence for a moment. She reached for her mug, the one with the chip I told her to throw out 2 years ago. She didn't. Now it just looked symbolic. "I want to do this respectfully," she said. Fantastic. Respect is what people hand out when they run out of justification. I accepted. "Zachary, I'm being serious." "So am I said. "In fact, I've never been more serious. I've already drafted a separation agreement template. Nothing legal yet, just bullet points. You can revise it. We each keep our own accounts, split the house profit if it's sold, and avoid passive-aggressive subtweets or inspirational quote posts that are clearly about each other." She didn't argue, just nodded. "And the bench plaques," I added. "Your committee still hasn't installed them yet, right?" "No," she said slowly. "Great. Take your name off mine. It's weird." She gave a half-laugh, half-grimace. "You're really going to be fine, aren't you?" "Oh, I'm thriving," I said. "I even started therapy." The guy gave me a worksheet about emotional boundaries. I turned it into a Venn diagram. Christina stood up. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep, but the kind that comes from being finally, completely out of plausible deniability. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a bit." I already added her address to the shared doc. Tab 6. Emergency contacts and alternative housing. Zachary. "I know." She left the room without further comment. I sat there for another 10 minutes, not because I didn't know what to do next, but because it felt polite to let the moment breathe. Then I closed my notebook, opened my laptop, and renamed the shared folder. It used to be called Us. Now it was called Formerly Ours Archive. I spent the morning uninstalling the garage shelving Christina insisted we needed last year. At the time, she claimed it would optimize space, but all it did was create 3 extra places for us to lose the screwdriver. Now that the shelf had no one defending it, I removed it without ceremony, took a step back, and admired the exposed wall like it was modern art. There's a strange sense of satisfaction in disassembling something you were once pressured into. It's not revenge. It's not therapeutic. It's more like quietly acknowledging that you didn't need it, and neither did the relationship that brought it in. The real moment of clarity came when I went to the county office later that day to sign the house over for listing. The clerk asked me if I wanted to include a note about the motivated sale. I said, yes. Please add that the house comes with central air, fresh insulation, and no hidden rooms unless you build one yourself. She didn't even blink. Just typed it in like she heard that kind of thing regularly. Maybe she did. This is the same town where two neighbors once sued each other over a hedge that leaned 3 inches past property lines. Suburbia isn't peaceful. It's just professionally quiet. By the end of the week, Christina and I had filed jointly. It was amicable in the way two colleagues finally agreed to stop forcing birthday lunches. No yelling. No lawyers hissing into phones. Just two people who used to share toothpaste pretending they weren't relieved. She sent me one last message. Not a dramatic email or a late-night text. Just a shared calendar update labeled, "Final trash day, my shift." That was her way of saying goodbye. She even emptied the recycling bin, which was possibly the most consistent thing she'd done all year. People asked me if I was okay. My cousin Jordan called and tried to offer wisdom in the form of football metaphors, which didn't help since I haven't watched a full game since the Super Bowl that ended with a wardrobe malfunction and half the country filing complaints. My mom offered to set me up with a neighbor's daughter who apparently owns her own lawn care franchise and has nice handwriting. I declined both. Instead, I made a spreadsheet titled New Life, Phase 1. It had 4 columns. Things I don't miss. Things I lied about enjoying. Things I thought I wanted. Things I might actually like. Under Things I Don't Miss, I listed fake laughter during committee meetings, decorative throw pillows with no actual function, weekly recaps of shows I didn't watch but was expected to pretend to follow. Under Things I Lied About Enjoying, I put farmers markets, podcasts about mindfulness hosted by people named River, that one weird acoustic album she played every time she made tea. Under Things I Thought I Wanted, I added matching towels, group vacations with people I had to Google afterward, surprise date nights involving escape rooms. And finally, under Things I Might Actually Like, I started simple. Waking up with no scheduled obligation to pretend I care about community garden disputes. Sorting my books by whatever logic I want, not by visual warmth. Going to the hardware store and not being asked if the color swatches feel emotionally harmonious. A week after Christina moved out, I received a manila envelope from her. It had the TV warranty, a labeled flash drive of shared documents, and one post-it note that said, "Didn't know if you still wanted this." No signature. Just that. I tossed the post-it and kept the flash drive, only because it was the one I bought, and it had a decent read speed. There's no poetic ending. No speech. No vague hope for someday reconciliation. We each left a drawer emptier, a wall barer, and a file folder heavier. I bumped into Brent once after it was all said and done. He was at the store buying candles. Cinnamon something. He looked surprised to see me and made a weak joke about needing to stock up. I nodded and walked past him. Didn't say a word, mainly because I didn't want to break my streak of going 7 days without performing emotional labor for people who smile too much. Eventually, I reclaimed the secret room. Took down the corkboard. Not out of spite. I just needed the wall for something better. I built a simple shelf. No decor. No symbolic quotes. Just space for things I actually use. My drill. A box of index cards. The manual for the lawnmower. Practical stuff. It felt good to fix things again without the implication that fixing something was a metaphor for the relationship. I never talked about Christina much after that. Not because I was bitter. Just because most people didn't need the full play-by-play. They wanted the version that ended with, "We just grew apart," because that's what they understood. So I gave it to them. But in the privacy of my own brain, where sarcasm has its own walk-in closet, I kept a record of every ridiculous, infuriating, oddly educational moment. Because in the end, all I really wanted was peace. Not the kind with wind chimes and curated playlists. The kind where your Sunday doesn't involve pretending to care about artisanal fence paint. So that's where I landed. Divorced. Calm. Mildly amused. And finally able to sort my laundry however I want. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel